Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to another episode of Hands on SAP Dev with me, DJ, but of course, as always in this series, more importantly, with the wonderful Daniel Hutzel. Daniel, say hi.
Hey,
Perfect. Well, we're here again. We're here with part four of this little series called The Art and Science of CAP, which Daniel, of course, took from a great book on small talk. If you haven't seen the previous episodes, I strongly encourage you to grab a beer, a glass of wine, a cup of tea, and a biscuit and enjoy because there's all sorts of amazing insights, philosophy, background that Daniel has been sharing on this series. Just like last week, we're going to start by just going back and reviewing or summarizing what we covered last week so we can all land our brains onto the runway ready for this part. Good morning, by the way, to Visas, or good afternoon to Visas in Thailand. I mentioned Visas is always here. He's a great member of the Hands-on SAP Dev Posse, as is Volker Buzek. Volker in the house, this thing on, been ages. Aloha to Volker, and also a good friend of mine as well, all good friends of mine, Andrew Barnard in Melbourne. Good evening, Andrew. I hope you got a glass of wine there. And VJ, good morning to you. And yeah, from Daniel too. Okay, let me stop talking and share my, oh my goodness me, this Zoom thing does my head in. What? Share? Share my screen. I'll share my desktop because I don't know how to share Windows. Right, so am I sharing my screen? Let me know. Let me go back to here. Oh, no, I've not pressed share yet. Wait a minute. There we go. Share. I'm an expert. I know what I'm doing. Not. Right, okay, so let's summarize. And Daniel, of course, as I would love you to jump in if there's anything you need to add or correct. But basically, oh, by the way, let us know in the chat. Daniel and I would love to know whether you lot would find it useful if I made these notes, which are basically internal notes for me and Daniel, if we publish them somewhere as well, for example, on my blog or something, for you to have a look at, because then that's the easiest way of, conveying the links as well. So let us know in the chat whether you want me to sort of publish these notes in some sort of form on the interwebs. Okay, so we started out by in the previous part two, Daniel had shown a really some really cool stuff on the Reppel, and Daniel not only works on CAP, in a big-brained sense as the father of CAP, but not only works on the documentation and the philosophies, but also is a CAP hacker. And he'd added some code using the knowledge coalescing assignment, which is a beautiful thing in JavaScript. And we got to talking about using caching. And where I mentioned that from my old Perl days, I remember this used to be called that approach used to be called the OR cache or ORCish maneuver, which was coined by one of the one of the authors of Effective Perl Programming. Daniel also then showed in the source code in cdslib rec, as in request handling, validate how aspect-oriented programming is used internally, i.e., it's not just do as I say, not as I do in CAP. It's CAP is eating its own dog food philosophy. And the example that Daniel showed was the set of base classes in the context of the core type system, where, for example, the composition class was extended the entity class, and we had a struct class and everything. So we have a look at that. That's really cool. A really cool example of how behavior is added to the base classes in that validate.js. We took a look at the upcoming CAPI additions, and lo and behold, between then and now, we have the November release. Make that a little bit bigger. There we go. So the November release came out. Well, it was announced yesterday, wasn't it? By from Renee on LinkedIn, the wonderful Renee. And yes, the first part in the release notes is, of course, about the documentation. So you all know this already. You knew this already. You knew this was coming. But I think it's a great way of seeing what's coming up. And also, of course, it's just like everything else, the CAP team is working openly, which I love. That's why we have, and proudly, in here, for example, in the getting started, the anti-patterns under construction. I'd much rather have that as a consumer of CAP documentation than, knowing what's coming up, knowing what's in their minds, than having all of a sudden, bang, perfectly formed content. No, please, Daniel and team, keep doing this. It's fantastic. Okay, so we talked about hexagonal architecture. I've put links in here, partly for me. So if I share this, of course, you'll all get the links as well. Um, that is a major philosophy that's informed CAP. And we also talked about C2, the C2 wiki created by Ward Cunningham created the concept of the wiki, by the way. That was the first wiki. And C2 stands for Cunningham and Cunningham. I think he had a company with his wife. I've also recorded an interview with with Ward, that was written down. So I've recorded it as a podcast episode on my Tech Aloud thing here. We also talked about stop fighting with the minutiae in Administrivia for everything relating to deploying to the cloud or doing multi-tenancy or both. Let the framework take the strain and just focus on the domain. I'm sure there's a poem in there somewhere. Plus, talking of the framework, Daniel also dwelled on this single points to fix section. Let me just open that up there so we know what we're talking about. Single points to fix. So this is the idea that let's have the code in the framework. So A, you don't have to write it. B, you don't have to maintain it or fix it. And C, it's fixable in one place by one team. And of course, I write about that as well in my blog post, 5 Reasons to Use CAP. The check mark here is, of course, in any sort of setting, documentation, discussion, meeting, you've always got to talk about AI. So check, we've talked about AI. But also there is a section in the CAPI documentation about the AI and the different generative AI coding facilities. So Daniel mentioned he was a big fan of, for example, Code Assist from Copilot, which is, of course, very different from code generators that generate entire starter projects, right? And again, we've briefly discussed that in previous parts. That said, somewhere in between, in my mind, there's this concept of, stub generators, which of course is not a new concept, but in terms of CAP, there's a new feature, CDS ad handler, which I think did come out in this release as well, right, Daniel? Yeah. Oh, Daniel's got his mute on. That's okay. CDS ad handler. So they're in. Check out the November release. CDS ad handler is there. And also, oh yeah, that's in passing as well. Again, from a philosophical perspective, Daniel dwelled on the fact that there is a subtle difference from origin between the CDS in the ABAP world and the CDS in the CAP world. In that, from the ABAP world, CDS came about in the form of view orientation. It was all about CDS views. While, of course, in CAP, it's all about the entities. Everything is a service. Everything is an event. Everything is an entity. Well, not everything is an entity. That's just my phrase, but there we go. That's a really nice distinction and helps us understand when we're trying to think of the two worlds at the same time. We also talked about this sort of monolith stroke modular approach. I'm not going to use the word microlith. I'm not at all. Where this Cloud Cap samples repo is a great example of doing more than just a single service or app. Sometimes I'll say service, sometimes I'll say app, right? And this is a really nice way of loosely coupling related services together, okay? And when talking about the microservices mania section, which is also somewhere in the anti-patterns, where is it? Here, microservices mania, Daniel also teased out the distinction between CAP services, which are, and I've written it here, I've tried to sort of translate it into words here. CAP services are logical units of modular domain design, whereas microservices are units of deployment, right? There's a very close relationship, potentially, sometimes, but not always, but philosophically, they're massively far apart, okay? So anyway, there's a new diagram or a relatively new rework diagram in the best practices section in the section models, fuel, runtimes. And that reminded me, and what Daniel said reminded me of the DWIM approach. Again, I spent a lot of time in the Perl community, and DWIM is another thing that was popularized in. It was from originally from in the 1960s from Warren Titelman in Lisp. Bolt, Beranek, and Bolt. I think that's Bolt, Beranek, and Newman. They used to build the IMPs that formed the core routers of the internet as it was being formed in the 60s. BBN. They were. That's where I think that's where isn't that where Vint Cerf used to work? BBN. I think it might have. Anyway, sorry, I digress. Anyway, do what I mean. CAP, I think, and these are my words, not Daniel's. I think CAP exudes a lot of the DWIM philosophy because it just does it, right? You don't even realize you need it, but it's just done it for you without you even asking. Anyway, we talked about uh, uh, inheritance and how Brad J. Cox described it in a wonderfully succinct and simple way. A zebra is a horse with stripes as being an example of that. And then we dived in, or Daniel dived into a little bit of the difference between what I would like to call the DSLs, CAPS DSLs. And also we started to look into, in the REPL, some of these languages in the form of things that you can assign to variables or constants and pass them around. So basically, language constructs in CAP, so for example, a query is a first-class citizen, and Daniel sort of showed that in the REPL, right? And I've also got a link there to the couple of Rich Hickey talks that we mentioned last week, The Value of Values, and also Are We There Yet? Two amazing talks that you need to lie down after to think about. Um, and just because I'm in charge of this document, I added a few links to some very old, but still I think maybe relevant introduction to functional programming because we all want you to learn about functional programming. I do anyway. Anyway, so that is the summary. I'm going to stop talking and stop sharing now to hand over to Daniel. I'm going to go back to the chat as well to see if anybody's said anything about sharing this information. Okay, Daniel, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Just trying to find the right window. Sorry.
That's all right.
Host disabled participant screen
Oh,
share.
yes, sorry. Because we were talking. See, right. I'll let you all into a like a background thing. Participants. Let me just do this now. Daniel Moore, make co-host. Or not make co-host. So we're using Zoom to broadcast this because it's a lot easier when we have guests. And Daniel and I get on early before this starts and have a nice chat. And I completely forget that I'm supposed to do about 7 different things to get ready for the live stream. One of which was give Daniel access. Right. Sorry, Daniel. Carry on.
So as I just see this nice picture, that's where we have been last year, actually.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
Who can see my wife here?
Uh, what?
Here.
Oh, there. Yes.
Okay. Um, yeah. Yeah, I just opened this slide deck by you, DJ. I need to look into that.
It's very old, but there's a picture of course, maybe the father of, the father of functional programming, maybe. Who can put in the chat who that is? If you know who that is, put it in the chat.
I have to admit, by the way, so I'm I think older than you, DJ. Don't know.
I think I'm maybe we're almost the same. I think I'm slightly older than you, but right about the same age.
Okay. Um, yeah, and I'm a lot is functional programming, but I have to admit I never did Lisp myself, except for some Emacs things. But my daughter is now learning Lisp in her
Amazing,
yeah.
amazing.
This was great. So she was telling me what Lisp is about, and I recognized all these things that I heard about, and yeah,
That is fantastic.
claimed to understand, but it stopped for me when it came to monads. When Rikiki
Oh, yes, yes.
talked about monads, I stopped understanding. And another guy at SAP told me about currying and
Oh,
all these things. I need to read this again.
ah, well, I have some blog posts. So monads for me is a bit of a brick wall, but that is, you don't need to know about monads to enjoy the benefits of the general FP philosophy in any language, for example,
Mhm.
JavaScript. for example. But currying and partial application, I do write about that. I've got some blog posts on that. Even I can understand that, so it must be
Right,
straightforward.
right. And currying, I even understood it. I would not be able to tell you what it is, but I understood it and I try to apply it because I like to steal stuff from some intelligent guys because I never invent anything, but only take what others invented, right?
Exactly, exactly. Basically it's all about functions that have a single argument, and it relates to the other side of the coin to currying.
Right.
It's partial application, and it's a way of it's a beautiful thing.
And I think to remember, it's like, and because if it's about these functions with a single argument, and they can do a lot of stuff with that. They try to make everything into a function with a single argument, sort of, right?
That's
Uh,
right. And it gives rise to the possibility of closures with an S, not with a J, in
right,
that you can wrap and contain or close over the values and pass those around again as first class.
right, right.
You can basically create functions on the fly that have context
Yeah.
via these closure mechanisms.
We should spend a whole other session on that things. Another one is list comprehension. I also understood this one and applied it, and I knew it from Smalltalk. So Smalltalk was influenced by two main prior arts. Simula, the real invention of object orientation
Yeah.
in the simulation domain only, and Smalltalk generalized it, and Lisp, Common Lisp in that case.
Yes.
And you see these things in Smalltalk, and yeah, if you are able to think in these terms, in this language, as we had it also in the very first session, if you work in a language, you start to think in this language, right?
Yes.
And if
Yes,
you think
indeed.
in that language, any other language is just yeah, you can just map it to the real thing, right?
Yes, exactly.
And that's even, again, I'm not a Lisper, but yeah, only this tiny little glimpse of it helped me doing a lot of stuff. Yeah, maybe that is a nice thing also regarding the anti-patterns that was raised at topic to deep dive in, and I would agree. And also the event services, reusing remote event services topic, we could maybe combine it.
Great. Yes.
Let's maybe start by, yeah, looking into this guide here. Getting started is the best place. Oops, here, get started. Yeah, these are the new guys, as you have seen meanwhile, mainly the introduction for project leads and product managers. No developer must read that. And the other way around, best practices, it's only for developers. But also the others are allowed to read, and the independents. Going to the best practices and linking to what we just had with the Lisp approach. Um, Sort of like currying, and the if all you have is a hammer, then you try to make everything into a nail. And you find this also mentioned here. So it starts here. Everything in CAP is a service, including the CAP framework itself. So we don't have database drivers, we have database services. And the database service is a CAP service, which means you can use it and extend it the same way as any other one, like is highlighted then down here in the agnostic by design, because this is a consequence out of this design. Because everything is a service and it always looks the same, we don't care about what is behind the service. And on the hexagonal architecture side, behind is the outer hexagon with the adapters, but you don't see it. What you see is your ports, as Alistair Cockburn called it. And these ports look always the same. You run a service. I think I have this then down here somewhere. So implementing a service, or in better terms, in the right term in CAP, reacting to event, and the sum of all your event handlers on a service registered with a service is your implementation, looks always the same, regardless of whether it's a remote event or a local event, or if you do this on your own implementation, on the service, this being the service instance that you want to implement, or if you add this to an external service, like the review service, to receive an asynchronous event to that is transported via an event broker, or if you put such event handler to some other service, like the database in CAP, which is a service, and you can just put in some event handlers. We'll show this in a Reppel. Or you could, when you connect to a remote service, so what you actually get is, think of this remote service being a CAP service, but actually we don't care, because if it's not a CAP service, like S4 Business Partner via OData or recently added RFC, what we do always is, like the currying guys with Lisp and the Hammer guys, we turn it into a lookalike of a CAP service. Means what you get here is a proxy to this remote service. And this proxy uses an outbound protocol adapter, depending on the protocol you have chosen. And you, as a caller of this service, don't care, because it just looks like a local CAP service. You could emit asynchronous events to it. You can also emit events to yourself as an implementer. This is the usual case for events. And can send requests to a service. Any stands for any local, remote, via RFC, OData, GraphQL, REST, database, message broker, other CALESI services. So our colleagues from the platform team jumped on the CALESI bandwagon, and the CALESI pattern, the central thing of is that everything is a service, and whenever you need to integrate with something that doesn't look nice, just wrap it into CAP service and then it looks nice, right? Looking nice means it's easy to learn how to consume it.
Yes.
You don't have to care about resilience, because we do. You don't have to care about protocol translations, the outer hexagon basically, etc.
I think you need to call it the CALESI Rolls Royce, not the CALESI bandwagon.
Yeah.
By the way, I've just seen this for the first time. If you scroll down again, where you add the before handler on the DB service. Now, we've discussed the fact that everything is a service over this series so far,
Yeah.
but that simple three-line code example here just brings it home. I could stare at that for hours with the implications that throws off the screen into my brain.
Mm. Yeah, the funny thing is actually, again, this is standing on the shoulders of giants. You mentioned carrying, and the other one is, again, Smalltalk. In Smalltalk, everything is an object. Similar to in CAP, everything is a service. And, the first thing I learned when I really learned Smalltalk was there is no such thing than a method invocation or a function call.
Yeah,
Instead, the basic principle in Smalltalk is you send messages
just
to
messages. Yeah.
objects, and these messages receiving add an object as a recipient, as they call it, is an event. And the object react to these events by executing methods like event handlers. So this is just stolen, right? And I knew that it is quite powerful, and therefore I found it a good idea to steal it. Yeah, and in Smalltalk, by the way, there's this one cool message or event. Whenever you send a message to an object for which this object doesn't have registered an event handler, this event, say foo, is turned into a generic author event called does not understand. And when you implement a method does not understand, aka you register an event handler for this event does not understand, that message is executed, that method is executed. And what this method can do is they can play the role of a proxy and translate whatever comes in to something that another external thing understands. And that's the idea of proxy. And I remember when Java back in the 90s, introduced dynamic proxies. This was a big thing for the Java world. And I really had some time understanding why it is that such a big thing, only defined to find out, well, because they does not understand, and they don't have these, yeah.
I'm sure Mats, who created Ruby, took that idea as well. There's a
Yeah,
concept in Ruby as well, which is
right.
very, very similar.
Ruby and Python, of course, have much influence. They are the truest Smalltalk descendants, much more than C++ never really was, and much more than Java even. Yeah, so this one means I can not only register event handlers to something that lives in my world, like my own services or the database I'm using. Actually, that doesn't live in your world, come to that. But also, when you connect to, say, the business partner in S4, you can even add event handler to that service. Well, actually, you don't add event handler to the business partner, but to your proxy, your client proxy to this service. And this makes this very powerful. And now guess what? How our proxies are implemented, like does not understand. It's just one method called this on star. We translate it to the protocol and delegate it. And that's also how we implemented our database services. A database service is just a bunch of this on star, translate the incoming request that carries a query, and the query again is in CQN, and we translate this CQN in, first of all, from a structured deep CQN into a flattened CQN, and then we translate this flattened CQN, which is relational model, into native SQL strings that we send to the database.
Yep. Wow.
Okay, so that's this thing. With that, I think let's do some Reppel stuff.
Let's go into the Reppel.
Um,
I think we need a phrase for that for this series. Let's Reppel it out or something. And as big as you can, please, Daniel.
yeah, doesn't get bigger.
That's
Okay,
cool.
okay. Maybe to introduce that this is actually the Node Rebel, Node.js Rebel, and they allow you to sort of provide tailored rebels for your purpose, and we did so for CAP CDS. There is this built-in commands. They start with dot, and help shows you the available built-in commands, and these are the standard commands by Node.js, and I added this one, and I added run and inspect. Let's look at inspect first. I want to inspect what this CDS thing is, you know. It's that object. A pretty small object. And why is that object though small? Because we did this, it's a facet to everything in the CDS runtime. And it's actually quite a big object. Make this bigger. We should open source CAP so you can see this stuff, right? Just kidding. But I'm on it. Yeah. So here we see that is all these properties that CDS has and gives you access to the other modules. And what we do is, this is a pattern that is possible since one of the latest Node.js releases. It always looks the same. We require that other module, but we don't want to load all these modules whenever you start a CDS process, right? But only on demand. And this is like this on-demand dynamic module pattern. It's even not possible, unfortunately, with ESM imports. With dynamic imports it is, but it has the await problem. Node.js in Node 23 is working on that problem, and
Yeah.
then you can also use it with imports. But what it does is basically this, hey, I'm a getter. I'm not there yet. So whenever you need me, I manifest by loading the target module and assigning that to myself. Now, what is super resolve? Yeah, what it is a derivative of supermodel. I like supermodels and super dot model, sounds good. Yeah, it's super is just super in JavaScript, and most of you just know it from in a method that I overloaded. I can
Yeah.
call the super method, but you can also call the super getter, and this is what I do here. So I overrode basically the getter
Ah,
and use the super getter to bypass my overridden getter. Because when you have a getter, JavaScript doesn't allow you to set this property anymore on that same instance subclass, but you can bypass your subclass with a super. So that's a thing that I use all over the place, at least where I really want to make sure I don't do eager loading. And
So
that's
the so
for that.
the key point here is that these are all lazy, yeah, lazy load. I think you just used that phrase, lazily loaded.
Right, right, exactly.
Almost like a thunk definition.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And now, maybe CDSN with Armini for everything that relates to configuration, service binding, access to the environment. It's sort of harmonized. So let's look at that. And it's a big object. And now if we look at CDS again, well, it's bloated now because CDSenv got loaded lazily. Um, and this is where inspect comes in. Inspect is nothing else than Node.js inspect. It allows you to say, I want to inspect this CDS thing. Well, it's the same, but it also allows you to pass the inspect options. And I want to see it with a depth 1 or
Ah,
depth 0. So this helps when you are in Reppel and want to sort of debug view something, right?
beautiful. Yeah.
Um, and that's it. It also allows you to statically set this. Now I updated it, and always when I look at something, it will be with this depth.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's really cool.
So
Really cool.
this. And the other one is run. And run is, as you could imagine, it's just calling the sort of CDS watch or CDS run. It's actually using CDS test behind the scenes because that is doing some other things. But actually, so I'm here in my CAP dev setup, which is a big mono repo where all our CAP projects are developed in. And in here, I also have the CAP samples, so I can just refer to that local folder, CAP samples bookshop, for example, and it would start the bookshop application. Or I can say I want to work with, because I used to work S-Fly doesn't work anymore, for me at least, because they
Oh,
turned it into a TypeScript application, and I
oh,
don't like TypeScript. Um, so it's always a bit of a hurdle, to be honest.
yes.
Incidents.
By the way,
So,
while you're typing that, we've got a couple of questions which we'll come to shortly. Questions for you, Daniel.
mhm.
And Andrew is saying, thanks for explaining .run. It was something he was curious about. In fact, here's my challenge to anybody watching right now. Go and find where .run is implemented
Yeah.
in the CAP in the CDS DK source code. It's quite easy to find, but it's wonderfully enlightening.
Mm.
And put it in the chat when you find it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so what CDS does, run, it starts your service. And as you know, when we bootstrap a service, then we register the services in this facade uh, element variable. And when we load a model, then you can access the sort of the default exported entities from that model. These are the ones with the namespace on the topmost file. I have to explain this in some other context. And for example, CDS entities books is this book reflected entity. And by the way, the CDS entities and CDS.run and CDS.txt PX are just shortcuts for CDS-DB dot entities.
Ah,
It's
yes.
actually a models operation in that case, or a service operation. DB is our service. And yeah, it's actually a function because that one allows you to specify namespace. And then
Yes.
you get these entities, if you are lucky. Yeah, because it doesn't display now. Yeah, it's a function and at the same time an object with these properties, but the display doesn't show it. Okay, but that was not the topic. Let's work with services. There's a catalog service of bookshop, and we can say read books. And books is a reflected entity that run gave me in my Reppel global scope. So this is the query that is created. And as we said last time, the query, again, Lisp, functional programming, is a first-class object. You can take it, modify it. For example, I can say, well, this is my query.
Store it, pass it around.
Exactly. And modify it, saying, hey, I want only some certain entities. No, it's a revised query.
Wow,
I can
yes.
even put queries on queries, but that goes too far. And then finally, sometime I pass it to somebody else. And actually, what await does is nothing else than await cds.run this query. And we get the data. And yeah, so I send now this query to the CDSDB service. And CDSDB service, as I said, I can add a custom handler, say console log. Oh, sorry. Console log everything. It's like poor man's debugger. Oh, not on. I wanted to have it before because there is already an on handler. And as you might know, it's like in Express. If I add an on handler after the other one, then the other one comes first. And that doesn't call next. Therefore, my on handler wasn't called. So let's turn it into before. And now we see this output here and see what's happening. So actually quite here, there's the mid request. There's a
Wow.
request where this query came in, my select query, the flattened one, by the way. And before we always do a begin, and after we always do commit. Okay, so that's about this service. Now, maybe a quick thing on, yeah.
Before you move to this next quick thing,
Mhm.
could you just do a arrow up to get to that cds.db.before? That is an example. What you just did there is a subtle example of what related to what we were talking about before with currying and first
Yeah,
class
yeah.
functions as first class citizens. You're passing a reference to a function, console.log. You're not calling it, you're saying this, and it will be called, it will be applied at the time.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is also the idea of late materialization that Lisp connects to this later on, right? And also Stone. Yeah. Let's do another thing with services. So I create a new service. Oh, one more thing. Let's inspect. Oops, sorry. The or first, right? CDSDB. DB is anyways also in the global thing now.
Mhm.
See, it's a quite, yeah, huge thing, right? So inspect helps.
Yeah.
Oops. Okay, it's a SQLite service with this name. It has some options, a kind. It has a model. Actually, this was this fat thing that we just saw. And it
Yeah.
has handlers. Let's look at the handlers. Yeah, it's initial before. Okay, one level of depth more. Uh, I don't have the right. No, it's here. Yeah, exactly. So I see now. Well, this initial is something that you shouldn't see. It will go away. It's only for us, the framework. I see there's one before handler, actually my log function that I just added for star, right?
Yes.
And there's a bunch of on create, create, upsert, update, different ones. That ones fill in the foreign keys and primary keys on create, upsert, and update. This one, handle deep, creates, upserts, updates. This one is the most famous on select handler. And then we have the real implementation of the things. Create finally calls this one, and this is exactly the one who does this translation to native SQL. So the framework itself is implemented using the framework, using CAP services. Because a CAP service at the end of the day, I will show this now in the code, such a thing. It manages models here, but we will skip this because important is all CAP services or CAP services in general can also work without models. So it's basically a thing that has handlers and allows you to register your handlers before, on, and after. And then the next operation is dispatch, which actually just makes sure the request coming in is prepared so they fill in all the missing stuff that we allow you to leave out because we try to be convenient. And then the actual method to do everything, the central method of the framework is handle. This is where the CAP framework is implemented, this method. Let's look at what it does. It says, oh, no, that is not the right one. Oops, yeah, it's lazy loaded in a separate file. What it does is, skip the initial handlers, it fetches all the handlers for this request that is registered for this request. And if we have some, it runs all before handlers in parallel in a promise all. And if one of the handlers threw an error or registered an error with a request, we stop processing. So the first phase stops everything because there is one before handler vetoing. Then we take the same on the on handlers, but this time it's not a parallel execution, but a so-called interceptor stack, as you know from Java servlets and other and Express middlewares are also interceptors. They run with this next concept of Express. And this is where actually the next is, and this is where the handler is executed. So taking the next out. And so this is the function next, basically, by the way. And we call the handler. And then again, if the result is not undefined, then we reply it. We register to reply it. And if there is a result, then we return it. This is going away, compatibility. And if there's an error after the next phase, we stop processing the request. And the last thing is doing the same as before for the after handler, and that's it. These lines is the core of the CAP framework.
I think I would posit that the UR stacked handler or interceptor stack idea was most famously popularized in the original web server, the HTTPD from Apache.
Right, right. Again, this is nothing that we invented, right? So look at Express, look at Apache, as I just said, this is how the good things are always done, I would say.
Yes. And in fact, I think that also informed the Internet Communication Manager that was, of course, added to the dispatcher in R3.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Oh, you know, yeah.
Digression alert, digression alert.
I just added a new explanation to what is CAP. Maybe some of you already saw it. You see these sentences, and then I cited somebody, an unnamed person, who once said CAP is like ABAP for the non-ABAP world. And I just added, well, it's not true in several dimensions, and you can interpret it in several ways. And yeah, ABAP is much older.
Yes.
You can also interpret this in several ways. And what I learned, I'm not an ABAP programmer, but what I learned when I was in contact with the real kernel guys of ABAP, Edgar Lott, for example, and some other
Yep.
guys. Um, hey, ABAP, they did stuff and they learned from other stuff, like, by the way, Smalltalk, um, which is great. ABAP is likely one of the greatest data processing machine, and things like the, I don't know the English term even, the official, because ABAP is German, the Verbucher, this is
The
like,
update processor.
yeah, this is, or batch input.
Yeah.
These concepts are timeless and the right concepts.
I would argue that actually just as good, if not better, as a concept than these was when ABAP first came along in my world in the late 80s. We were still writing applications and modifying SAP R2 applications in assembler, right? That's where I got my Q macro from.
Mm,
But ABAP came along as a report writing language,
right,
which was very powerful. Sorry, very big then back in the 80s. And we were writing event-driven based reports without even
right.
knowing it because
Mhm.
we wrote these get KNA1, get or whatever, get KNB1, get this, get that, end of selection. And these were actually events. So we were riding on the back of the engine that read the database and spat out upwards to us the different segments as it transcended through the hierarchy. So that was just an absolutely beautiful thing that nobody realized how pure an implementation of sort of event-driven reporting it could be.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Another thing, as you mentioned, reports. Yeah, SAP since years and recently is very much into no-code development and citizen
Yeah,
developer, I don't know. Uh, and I told once one guy, what is the best end user development tool that I wrote actually in my university's time a thesis on this topic. And at that time, we said Excel is the most successful end user development tool, citizen user development tool.
yeah, yeah,
And I think this still holds true. And the second most is ABAP reports.
yeah. That's
ABAP
very true.
reports is what every out there is using. And I was really, yeah. Okay, back to, we don't have too much time left, and I spent again too much. Yeah,
No, that's cool because actually, while we're talking of time, we've got about 12 minutes left. There are some questions and comments in the chat that we should leave 5 minutes for at least towards the end.
okay. Then let's do a very quick, another Reppel thing, which I actually wanted to do. So let's fasten seatbelt. So I create a new service without any models, without nothing. It's just this bare bone handler thing that we saw. It's just an event handler registry. And yeah, that's it. And whenever we have a service, we can do something with it, of course. Let's send it a request. Oops, sorry. So it gives me a promise. So let's await the promise. Well, did nothing, right? Because I didn't have a handler. So let's add a handler. Uh, yeah, this is, the next thing. What is a request? You can read it in the papers. A
Mhm.
request happens to be an event message. It tells you what method was called and what payload data was passed. Same for event messages.
Yep.
Okay, so that's basically a service, and I would now really fast forward and go to the CAP samples and show you a glimpse of what DJ has in one of your sessions in a very elaborate thing. You remember the picture about CAP samples, and actually CAP samples is really meant to showcase a microservice
Yep.
thing, and it's meant to showcase. And when you do microservices, don't develop with microservices because it's a pain in the ass, right? So I have a the bookshop service, and the bookshop service wants to reuse the reviews service, and I just start the bookstore, and what we see here is it actually is using the review service, but because the review service is not up and running and I don't have a service binding to a remote review service, we automatically mock it at development time.
Mhm.
So this is what CAP is about, making sure you develop fast and without a lot of barriers. And when I open another shell and start the reuse service, yeah, I'm in CAP samples already, review service. So it's running on port 4005, actually, for this demo. We put a .env file into this folder. And now I start my bookstore again, which uses the review service. Now that binding machinery found a service binding in my environment for this review service running over here and connected to it instead of mocking it. And
Is it
this is
worth showing the folks the hidden file in your home directory, which is used to
exactly.
communicate this information?
Exactly. This is this secret service binding. You might have seen these lines and wondered what it is about. Whenever we start with CDS Watch a CAP service, a CAP process, that CAP process registered all the services automatically in here. And what is this? This is exactly what a service binding is about. Give me the credentials that author needs to connect to me. In that case, locally, they don't need a destination or a password because I'm in local development, right? And this is this magic of this, say, serverless development model that CAP provides out of the box. Okay, but with that, I think we should have the last
Yes.
and reserved for the questions, right?
Perfect. Well, I'll guide us through the questions if you want, if that
Okay,
helps.
very good.
So one of the questions that came up when you were in the Reppel, which is probably the most recent in our minds, where is it? A question from Rudolf Batke. Does an online reference exist for Reppel? Now, while you're thinking of that, my take is that it's basically what you would be writing in a source code file, but
Right.
with extra juice. But that's a really crap way of describing it. I think Daniel,
No,
you
but this is exactly the point. And I already apologized for the gaps in our documentation last time because I told you, hey, whenever there's something missing, Reppel is your friend. And what this means is exactly what you say, DJ. You can write something like you write in your code, starting with this require sub CDS thing. The only thing is, I usually just leave out that const var or let because
mm,
when you do const once,
you can't do it
do
again in
it
the same Reppel.
twice, right?
Yeah,
Because that's because it's really a JavaScript program.
yeah. By the way, to folks who want more more about the REPL, there's a series. I've just put the link in the chat. There's a three-part series I was going to run based upon the Devtoberfest, no, the TechEd keynote that I did about CDS plugins and everything. And the
Yeah,
second part of the series, I'm going to dive into the REPL and understand and do the introspection to work out what services, what entities, what elements, and everything to find out where the annotations were for the plugin. So if you're interested, I've pushed this series back to January because, of course, Daniel takes precedence. I was going to do this December, but we're going to dive into the REPL in that little series, the three-part series that starts
that is
in the
very
beginning
good.
of January.
Yeah. So and just to emphasize this, I'm also a developer, not only a shit talker, hopefully. Um, And I happen to implement this stuff here and this stuff there, and QL is from me. And guess what? I never know how it really works out of my head at all the time, right? So what I usually do is I go to my Revel, I try out how this select now works here, like this select from authors and how was the exact syntax then for the word, and I'd experiment with and stuff, and therefore I yeah, it's much faster for me to just try it out in Reppel than, oh, because I didn't load Bookshop. Yeah, never mind. I tried out in Reppel than finding it in my own documentation, sort of, right? Because it's just fast. The only warning, don't use undocumented stuff. After you found out how it is, check back whether it is really meant to be used by you. Because if you don't use it, we don't give any pardon when we have our next major. We take the right to change internal stuff all over the time because otherwise we will die and have
Yep.
to give you something like OData v4 as a complete disruptive thing to v2.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. So while we're still on the REPL, a couple more REPL related questions. One from Vishal. Can I make CDS REPL work with hybrid profile, like using HANA Cloud with CDS REPL?
Yeah, because it's a standard CAP program. All this CDSN stuff are available as usual and kick in as usual.
Yeah, perfect, perfect. And finally, where was it? Oh, well, like more of a comment or a request from VJ. Cap REPL with Java REPL CDS lib would be great also.
Is there Java Rebel?
I don't
If
think there is, to be honest. No, that's why there isn't a Java REPL in Cap.
okay,
That's my
okay,
guess.
yeah, yeah, fully agree. The problem with Java is it's not a dynamic language.
Yeah.
Like Lisp, where the rebel came from.
Yeah, basically, so just taking that answer apart a little bit and expanding it, the power of the REPL for the Node.js runtime is from the Node.js REPL itself. It's not
Right.
anything that the CAP team have built apart
Exactly.
from, built upon.
Yeah, exactly. And building something like this from scratch is, I actually tried it once and I stopped because, yeah.
I think if you're going to build a REPL from scratch, you have to be building the language from scratch at the same time.
Right, right, exactly.
So there was that. There was also a question from Rudolph. I didn't quite understand it, and it was a bit of a while ago, so I apologize, Rudolph, for not asking it at the time. Any plans to integrate libSQL? Maybe if we don't understand that, maybe Rudolph, you could add some more comments to explain what you meant there. Sorry about missing that question a bit earlier. We've got
Maybe we
also
should get back to that in the next session and look a bit more at the query language part of the things again.
yes, that would be
Mm.
great. Oh, by the way, Marian has backronymified CAP to Cloud Aufbereitungsprozessor, which I think is lovely.
You know what the future of ABAP is?
CAP. Kabap. Kabap. You heard it here first, folks. By the way, also thank you to oh I missed I can't find it now. F Capra. He's adopted my phrase for people like the wonderful people in the chat here. We're all Capirates. And he said, "Good morning, Cap Pirates." So, so Andrew has a question, which opens up the question. This is very recently. Whatever we just said just now opens up the question. Given the different language capabilities, Java and JavaScript, do you aim for parity between the versions of CAP?
Yes, definitely. Um, Actually, we will add an updated feature comparison matrix sort of to the cap hire. You find already the traces of it, preparation of it in this introduction, what is cap, which here is about the most important stuff, and then comes just lists of features, and we would add the columns Java, Node.js to that, and also on some detailed level, just to share also with you the different speed of these stacks. So Node.js was in the gold rush times when we started CAP, and it was way ahead. But we piled up technical debt, to be honest, because it was gold rush times. The good thing is I was able to control everything in a way that I always told everybody, hey, our APIs need to be stable, right? We will never have something like an OData v2, v4 effect. Never ever. And we should always be able to refactor completely behind the scenes. And see, this is what we did with CDS8 with the OData adapter and the database services, which are huge parts of the whole stack, basically 60%. And Then the Java team onboarded about 2 years later, and they had the luxury of starting on a green field in a very nice way and following the bad practices that we learned in Node.js and avoiding the mistakes. And
Yes.
they designed it very well, but they were always behind. Recently, Java took up, and because we have internally huge adoption of internal Java units now, these days actually, Java is ahead of Node.js even in quite
Yes.
some things. But
For example, CDS.map, which came out last in
correct,
October, there's a perfect example of where Java is ahead.
exactly, or Triview. And so things are always in the flux, but they're always climbing in the same speed, sort of.
Perfect.
One last word before we leave, sorry, before your closing words. We talk about strengthening our community initiative by giving the community a home, and we are looking for names. And what came to my mind is something like CapX, CapX, like the extension of Cap. Capsule, help us finding other nice names. I like things like CALESI, Capire, Capsule.
Perfect. So that's your challenge, folks in the chat. Think about names for the community. Fantastic. Daniel, thank you so much again. We'll discuss whether we got time for another one next week. And folks in the chat, especially, thanks for watching. Thanks for being live. Thanks for putting all your questions and comments. We love it. And we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Perfect. We're off air.